This is Canada Reads American Style, featuring two friends who love Canada Reads and Canadian literature. Welcome our host Rebecca from Michigan and Tara from Ontario.
Welcome, listeners, to Canada Reads American Style. Happy holidays. This is Tara, and Rebecca is here with me. Hello, Rebecca.
Hello.
And we are here to discuss our top books/reads of 2024. I don't know about you, Rebecca. Well, I kind of think I do know, but I am in a food-fueled fug. I have a cup of tea sitting beside me. My brain is muddled, but I am so excited to do this today, to discuss our top reads of the year.
Yeah, and I am getting over a cold that I cannot really fully shake. And so I think I'm going to go to the doctor in the new year and figure out why I can't shake this cough. And I know it wasn't COVID or anything, but I don't know why I can't. So that's why I've asked Tara to just do most of the talking so that I don't cough in everybody's ears. So, yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, food-fueled fug. So thanks to Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, who knows what you're going to get from me today. But we have decided to do our top 10 of the year. Now, Rebecca knows I love a checklist, but I am also terrible at staying within the limits/rules of a top 10. I am, but
Okay.
I'm seriously having decision-making inability this morning.
Well, I actually originally had a top 14, but I
Okay.
made myself pare it down.
Yeah.
Because I thought, no, everybody's heard me talk about these books before, so I thought have a nice tight list.
Yes, I want a tight list, and I'm hoping to make it tight as we go along. So I will start off just here briefly saying that of my reading for 2024, my nonfiction reading was down a little bit. I think last year I was 70%, 30% kind of thing, fiction versus nonfiction. This year I was at 76% fiction and 24% nonfiction. So slightly down. However, the majority of my top reads are nonfiction, which is why I had trouble making a decision, because I kind of made a nonfiction list and a fiction list. And my fiction list, I'm at 5. And I will say that I'll save that for later. My nonfiction list is at 11.
Wow.
5-star reads. 11 5-star reads in nonfiction. I know. As I went through, skimmed my journal, everything that's really stayed with me has been my nonfiction reading.
I'm shocked because in my top 10, I have one nonfiction and the rest are fiction. So we kind of...
We're doing a Freaky Friday.
We did.
Yeah.
Man.
Weird. So that's why I'm whittling down that 11 to 5 is almost impossible in my brain when I looked at it this morning. But I'm going to do my best. I have 3 for sure that I know, and then I may lump together a couple and see where it goes. And I will also say that of my top 5 fiction books, only 2 of them are by Canadian authors.
You're blowing my mind.
I know. And it's not because I haven't read a lot of Canadian authors. I have read a lot of Canadian fiction. The majority, don't have the numbers, but it's at least 75%, I would say, of my fiction reading is by Canadian authors. But I don't think, hot take, I don't think it's been a stellar year for Canadian fiction.
Oh, that's interesting.
I know. I feel bad saying that, but...
Well, of my top 10... 6 are Canadian, 3 are US, and 1 is Australian. Okay.
Now, I'm looking at the majority of my nonfiction reads are Canadian authors.
Mm-hmm.
Only I think I have 2 Canadian or 2 American authors out of 11 in my nonfiction. So,
okay.
anyways, Wacky.
Let's
Okay,
I can't wait to hear
let's
your
jump in.
list. Oh my
Let's jump in.
gosh. Yeah.
Want me to start?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to start with perhaps like my first top nonfiction read of the year. So, these aren't ranked, but I'm just saying this was the first one I finished, I think back in February or March. And it is Fire Weather, The Making of a Beast by John Vaillant. Obviously, nonfiction. It's about I think it was in 2016, the forest fire that ravished Fort McMurray in Alberta. That's the first part of the book. And then the second part, he goes into really the science and the history of climate change
Mm.
and how climate change has set up the world for these crazy forest fires to happen. It I spiraled. I've mentioned this when I read the book. It was a dark read for me. It was a difficult read. I spiraled while reading it in just, what's going on in the world, but that book has stuck with me and I was so glad that I read it. But yeah, difficult, but it's up there. It's in my top.
Yeah, that one I can't read, but because
Yeah.
I can't read climate stuff, it upsets me too much, and
Yeah.
so I bury my head in the sand and I listen to you when you talk about books like that. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
My first book that I want to it's a series actually. So technically it's 3 books in one, but it's the category. So my top youth book that I read this year or series is the Ginny Ross series by Heather Stemp. And it was Amelia and Me, Under Amelia's Wing, and Beyond Amelia. And it really is the story of Heather Stemp's family, who actually had a connection to Amelia Earhart. They're from Harbor Grace, Newfoundland. And that's where Amelia was before when she was taking off to fly over to Europe. And as I had said before, and I've raved about this series, I talk about it all the time. It reminds me of Anne of Green Gables. That's how beautiful the storytelling is and how historically accurate Heather's research is and how she took her family story and created this connection to Amelia Earhart. And as you all may know, or many of you may know, I went to see Amelia's birthplace in Kansas, as well as her hangar museum. So I'm everything about Amelia Earhart. It was absolutely fascinating. And she's a woman who I would never have known to dig this deep into who she was as an incredible person if it hadn't been for Heather Stemp's beautiful series. So yay to Heather. And I just hope that she continues to write more young adult historical fiction. I loved it. Great series.
I'm going to add to your travel bucket list and say that you need to finish out by going to Newfoundland.
I really would love to do that. And it's so funny because Heather, I had interviewed her for the podcast and she had an event at Harbor Grace and she sent me back a sticker that says Harbor
Oh,
Grace. So I
nice.
thought that was just so sweet of her. And she also sent me copies of her books all signed to me personally, which was really sweet. And I had already bought my own copies. So I said I'm going to find a girl who I think would love this series and give her my 3 copies and then keep the ones I have with Heather's messages to me in them, which I just love that. I thought that was so sweet and lovely of her to do.
Okay, I'm going to stick with my nonfiction and I'm going to do a genre. And it is that I had this insight this year into my reading that I love birding memoirs. And I have 3 on my list. I think I could have put 4 because there was another, but I have 3, and I will just say the Better Living Through Birding by Christian Cooper, who is the Black man who was during the pandemic was accosted by a white woman in Central Park. So it's his story. I went into it thinking it was a story of that incident, but it's his whole life. He did bookend with its something in Central Park, ending with the infamous incident in Central Park. But you get his whole life from child to present day, his start in birding, his relationship with his father, his being a Black man in birding and having that almost not acknowledged at times. His work in the comic book industry, fascinating. I loved this one. The second one is The Backyard Bird Chronicles by Amy Tan. It's Amy Tan. She's just watching birds from her what I sounds like a beautiful house with her own illustrations. It's an amazing book. And then Field Notes from an Unintentional Birder by Julia Zarankin, a Toronto author. And it is her story of how she accidentally became a birder. I loved all three of these books. I had to get them in. I couldn't choose.
Yeah, and I want to read them because I'm a very novice birder. I paid a lot of money for my binoculars for the purposes of doing that. So I want to read these books because that you made them sound amazing. My next category is my classic titles because as if you've been following along, my goal was to read 12 classic women authors, and so I have a category of classics. So I have 3 titles which I'll give you. Should I go one at a time or should I do all 3 of them in this category?
That's up to you. Like, is it, yeah, whatever you think flows better, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will do one at a time just to give everybody a break and then I won't start coughing. So that would be probably
Okay.
the best way to do it. Okay. So in my classics, one of my favorites this year was The Street by Ann Petry, which was a book written in the 1940s in New York. And it was a story about a young Black mother and her son and just trying to make a better life for themselves. And it was incredible. And again, this is that idea of Black women authors that got published at a time when you wouldn't have expected them to be able to tell a really graphic, hardcore story of what their lives looked like. And I loved it. So I highly recommend if you haven't read The Street, it's widely available. And I think this was the one that was the first book by a Black woman that sold 1 million copies. And again, I think it was like 1946 or something like that. So highly recommend The Street.
My next book is a graphic novel, memoir, and it is I'm So Glad We Had This Time Together by Maurice Vellekoop. I read this a few months ago. I fell in love with his story. It's his illustrations. It's beautiful. So it is his story of being raised in a very Christian family and coming out as a gay man later in life, well, like, once he reached adulthood kind of thing. And it's also a story of art because his art is so enmeshed in his life story that it's also about him becoming an artist as well. And I loved it. This book.
Yeah, that's the one I'd heard him interviewed on The Next Chapter, and I definitely wanted to read that book.
Yeah.
So, is he talk about is Carol Burnett or something in the
Yes.
book? Okay, that's what I thought because that's the title. So,
Yeah, because he was a huge Carol Burnett fan, or is a huge Carol Burnett fan. So there is illustrations of her. I
oh,
love there's
cool.
because it takes place in Toronto, so you get the illustrations from the. He and I are roughly the same age, so like the 70s and stuff too of Toronto and the Eaton Center. And
Oh, yeah.
um, oddly enough, he puts in his home address, like where his childhood address is in the book, and it was just doors away from where my aunt lived. So he just lived
Oh,
during the same time, just a couple of doors down from one of my aunts, which I love because I'm
I
like,
love
I
that.
think that's her house when he showed the neighborhood and stuff. It was really cool.
Okay, that's a really, what do they say? 6 degrees of separation.
Yeah,
That's so cool
yeah.
that you have that connection to it. That's awesome. My second classic book that I want to call out is My Brilliant Career by Miles Franklin. And Miles Franklin is a woman author. But that was the book, and this is the Australian title, that really was my first introduction when I saw it as a movie to what Australia looked like in the early 1900s. And I just love this book. It just was such a great story because she wrote it when she was quite young. It was her most notable book that she ever wrote. She didn't really have the same success after that. And I just think it showed a life of a really hard life that women lived at the turn of the century in Australia at that time. So I absolutely love that book, and I'm so glad I read it, and I'm glad that I waited all these years, honestly, like 40 some years to read it after having seen the movie, but it was definitely worth the wait.
I like that you revisited a lot of your favorite movies this year through the books. It's
Yeah.
like a theme. I don't think it was intentional on your part, but I noticed it throughout the year.
Yeah, it wasn't intentional, but I think that's what was really interesting when I just because I literally sat down and thought, "Okay, I'm just gonna start looking up classic women authors." And then all of a sudden, all these classic books came up, and I thought, "Oh my gosh, I've seen the movie." And I love that because I do get hung up on I often don't go to see a movie if like, I won't see the book and the movie together because it's never the book is always better, you know? But these were movies that I really, really loved, and it was so long ago that I'm not comparing, like, "Oh, what did they do, or where did they take a diversion into something else that wasn't in the book or something." I was able to just enjoy the movie years ago and then love the books because the books are always better, so
Yeah. Okay, my next book is another memoir, and it is My Body is Distant by Paige Melot. I just finished this book last month, 2 months ago, within the last couple of months. Paige is a local author to me. She's a trans woman, and it's a difficult read in that it's just not easy being a trans woman. It's just, it's not, and she discusses her story. It's like her journey of coming out as a trans woman. At the same time, she lived like a digital life, a digital life, an online life through one of these games. I can't remember what they would be called because I'm not familiar with them. Like a role playing game kind of thing
Oh,
with
mhm.
chat rooms and stuff like this, in which she built relationships and friendships. And at a time when she couldn't be her genuine self, she could be in these games, yeah, online, I should say. So, and it's such a beautiful story. And I've never read anything that she would have alternating chapters between her digital life and her real life. I'm going to say real in that, because it's all whatever you're experiencing is a real life, but her non-digital life.
Yeah,
And I was such a powerful read. Not easy, again, not an easy read, but powerful.
yeah. That one sounds really good as well. I remember you talking about it
Yeah.
in more detail, and yeah, that's an incredible story. My last book, and I actually in each category, because I have 4, but in each category, I also asterisk my favorite of the series. I mean, of that category. So I have to say this was my favorite book of all my classics this year, and I don't even know how to pronounce it. Ethan Frome? I don't know how to pronounce.
From? I don't know.
Yeah, it's Frome, but I'm not which you would think it would be from, but Frome? I don't know. By Edith Wharton. Anyway, I I mean, it's hard to say because 'cause I'm old, but, it could be the most tragic book I've ever read in my life. I don't know, but I love this book so much. Everything about this book was incredible, and mostly, I think the reason it resonated with me because I love a tragic story, but I think it resonated with me because the landscape was so beautifully described. I In my mind's eye, I will never forget the scene. Like, I can see the house. I can see when Maddie and Ethan sit down to have this meal, and the kitchen is dark, and they're eating by, lamplight and stuff, and the hill that people go sledding on, and the point at which he is traveling and the horse is going through this deep snow, like, everything about it just felt like I was right there in the middle of it, and I could just visually see the entire story, and I don't know I mean, I'm a visual person anyway, so I think I do this when I read books, but I think Edith Wharton just had this ability to paint a picture of this story and these people that will live with me in my brain for the rest of my life. And I think I'm sure there's a movie. I'm sure it's been made into a movie. And I don't even, oh, and I think it was actually made into a movie within the last, say, 20 years or so. And I'm not even sure if I would watch it, but I don't know that I would watch it because I kind of love that I have this image in my head of what it is, what it looked like. And I loved this book, even though it's tragic. And if you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't read it, don't blame me if you don't love the story because I'm not gonna lie, it was something else.
Okay, I've never been interested in reading this book until now.
Well, and it was hilarious because my sister's boyfriend, he just read the book, and it's short. I think it's like I mean, maybe it's 150 pages. I don't even remember. It's short, but it was funny because he read it, and then he said to me at some point, he said, "Well, what character speaks to you in this book?" And I said, "I'm not telling you anything." And then after he finished, I said, "Here's who made the most impact on me, and here's why." Because you have to read the book, and don't let anybody tell you anything. Just read it and just feel the book. It's incredible. And of course, it's why that's the thing about classics. It's why they're freaking classics. You you read them, and it speaks to our humanity and everything, and it's classic for a reason. People return to it, they read it, they get a lot out of it. Oh, and that's what I started to say is my sister's boyfriend was saying something about a particular part of the book, and I said, "Well, here's why I think it's this." And I was like, "Oh my god," like I hadn't thought of that until I was responding to him, and then it gave another layer to the book that I just went, "Oh, for crying out loud." Like, it never dawned on me until I was talking to him about it. So,
Yeah.
that's why buddy reads are so good, even though this wasn't a buddy read. But it draws out things that you maybe didn't think of until you're talking about it with somebody else. So, I hope that you someday read it.
Yeah. No, I just added it to my TBR. I think I'll like push it up a little bit instead of how I normally it goes, books go added chronologically at the bottom. I think I'll push it up so I can read it this year because I am like intrigued.
Yeah.
And then I want to find out who spoke to which
Yeah, yeah.
character. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I got to read it just to find that out. Okay. My last nonfiction book. So I have managed to whittle down to kind of five, and that I lumped three together. But
Mhm.
my last nonfiction is I've not brought to the podcast yet because I just finished
Ooh.
it a couple weeks ago, and it is not going to surprise you, Rebecca. The Knowing by Tanya Talaga. Holy crap! Like amazing! Everyone should read this book.
I can't wait. Yeah.
I know. We saw her at Eden Mills, and it's kind of like the jumping off point for her to write this book was to find the graveyard of the grave site, the burial site of her great grandmother, I believe. So I thought it was going to be that story and the story of her great grandmother and her family, which it is. But she does such a deep dive into the history of Canada and residential schools. Like I thought I had a good knowledge of residential schools, and then I read this book, and she's left nothing unturned. Like she just it's out, everything. Like I'm just like I did not know that. Like she just goes right back from the beginning of history for Canada and as a country and how these and who, how, why these schools were put into place. Amazing.
Yeah, and just for those of us in the United States, we will not have access to it until I think it's June of 2025. We cannot get it. So you can't even get it shipped from Canada to the US. They won't do that. So we may have to wait a little bit, but yeah.
Really, you can't even get it shipped. Like if you were to order.
No, that's what's happened for me with Canada Reads a couple of times. There were books that were because publishers have the ability to make those decisions. I don't know why they do that, to be honest with you. And maybe it's because they have a deal set up for an American edition and they don't want to tip into those sales for something.
Yeah,
But yeah, I've had to go to Canada to get some books from Canada Reads because I could not get them in the US because they were not allowed. Because I've even ordered things on Amazon through Canada and I can't ship it from there to a US address. I can't ship it from the US Amazon to a US address. So That's why
Wow.
I'm so thankful for the bookkeeper right across the
Yeah.
border. Thank goodness for them.
I'm interested when the American edition comes out to see the cover, because the
Hmm.
cover of the Canadian one is a Kent Milkman painting.
Yeah.
So it'll be, and usually the American and Canadian covers are different.
Oh, absolutely. So
Yeah.
that my goal is I will go to the bookkeeper to get my Canadian copy.
Rebecca, I think you're up next.
So now this is my category for fiction, and I have 5 books in my fiction section. So and these were all Canadian authors, except for the number 1. But anyway, the other 4, it's Sisters of the Spruce by Leslie Shimotakahara. And one of the things I loved about this that I talked about, and I won't go into great detail about all of these books, but it's really kind of a Huck Finn, Tom Sawyer kind of, but with girl characters that were just fierce, awesome girl characters. And I thought Leslie did a super, super job. I would just say, look up the book. I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but look up the title, look at my Instagram account where I put a longer review in. But I loved Sisters of the Spruce, set in the BC area by Leslie. It's a fabulous book.
And your interview, right? You interviewed her.
Duh, I forgot. Yes, I also interviewed her. Thank you for reminding me of saying that. Yeah, and I did interview her as well, and I really love this book.
It's funny when you said, when you started this and you were like 4 of the 5 are Canadian authors, because obviously I've already said my fiction is kind of reverse. I was like, oh, what's going to be on hers? But I'm like, I wonder, because I'm like, what have I missed? What did we think differently about? But I
I
have
think you
not
haven't
read Leslie's book yet.
I don't think you've read any of the 4 that I'm gonna
Okay.
mention, right.
Leslie's, I think I'm reading it in January, actually. I have a copy in.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Okay, so my first fiction book is a collection of short stories, and it is Coexistence by Billy Ray Belcourt. I read this in the spring, I think, midway through the year, and I love this collection. Holy. So I've read a lot of, well, I think 2 of Billy Ray's previous books, not his poetry. And I enjoyed them, but they didn't grab me like I thought they would. His writing was amazing, and I could tell from his earlier works that I'm like he knows how to write. But something didn't grab me emotionally, which is what makes a book like a top like a 5-star read for me, is if it emotionally grabs me as well. As and this collection grabbed me right from the beginning. I was like,
Mhm.
done. I'm like, whatever I found, I'm going to put in quotation marks, was missing from his writing in the previous books of his that I'd read is in this book. Like, he has found it. And that might just be like a maturity thing too, with right, like, because he's still so young.
Mhm.
And who knows? But I like, I'll read everything for sure. I was going to anyways. Like, I really did enjoy his earlier books, but I'm like, hands down, we'll be reading everything he writes from now on.
Awesome. I
Yeah.
love that.
And there was like a sneaky, I'm going to say sneaky because he throws in a horror story in the middle of this collection
Oh,
that you're not
wow.
expecting, because it's a literary collection, right? And then there's this horror story that was terrifying, because one, it really is, and two, you're not expecting it in this kind of collection. He just boom throws it in, and I flipping love that as well.
Man,
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Okay. My next fiction book is Birdsuit by Sydney Hegele. I love their book. This was a quirky story. Again, I got to interview them. I also wrote a review on my Instagram. But this book is this kind of quirky story that has a little bit of magic realism in it. And it's a family drama. And to me, this was a book that just had a ton of layers to it. And that if you read this as a book club book, you would have just so much to talk about. And I really loved this book.
Yeah. This is another one I didn't get to in 2024, but will be in 2025, and I can't wait to read it. Like, to read it and then discuss it with you. We could do like a little buddy read together.
Yes, let's do a little buddy read, because I definitely would read it. I would read it again, because I think, again, there are layers to it. And I think talking it through with someone would make it fantastic. Mhm. even more fantastic.
Now, the next book I have in my list, which is not by ranking, I'm actually going to skip over because I feel like it might be your number one.
I think it's probably going to
So I
be.
want to leave it
Well,
till
no,
the
you
end
go
so that
ahead.
you can speak. Nope, nope. I want to save it till the end just to see if it is the same
Okay, I
book
know it
because
is. I
I
know
feel
it
like it
is.
is. So I'm going to leave it.
Okay.
So my next one is going to be Followed by the Lark by Helen Humphreys, which is her latest book. And it is her, I'm going to say retelling, but it really isn't. It's her book about, oh my gosh, I forgot to look it up. The American author who lives in a cabin. Ah,
Thoreau?
Thoreau.
Thoreau, yeah.
That's it, right? Yeah. It's his story. She tells his story in her beautiful, beautiful writing, and I love this.
Okay, now I don't want to give anything else away, but is this potentially then, of all of the ones you've read so far of her this year, that's your favorite of hers, or should I not ask that question?
No, you can ask. I don't think I can say that it's my favorite because I have loved all of her books
Mhm.
equally. And I
Mhm.
think I wanted to include her in this list. So I chose her most recent book to go in this list. Because everyone, when I look back on her books, I'm like, yeah, that was a great book.
I think it would be hard. If you've loved everything, I think it would definitely be hard.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So yeah, I just went with her most recent because you can't go wrong. I couldn't go wrong with it.
Yeah. My next book for my fiction category is Making Up the Gods by Marion Agnew. And again, I interviewed Marion, and I know it sounds like I'm just promoting our past podcast episodes, but it's the truth. I love this book so much that Marion had written a short story first of this one of the main character in the book, and it won a competition. And when she told me that, I thought, I've got to find that article, that short story. So I did. I went through and got a friend of mine is an academic library director, and she put it through her interlibrary loan process, and I got a copy of it. I read it. I loved that short story, and it sort of gave me a little bit more of the characterization of the main character, which right off the bat, I can't think of her name right off the bat. But anyway, it's about her, this young boy, and this man who was there to sort of a grifter who was going to take something from her. And it's just a really beautiful story. And again, visually, I can see the old cabin. I can see where she lives. I can see them walking through this area in Ontario. It was just a really beautiful story about these three people. And it just grabbed my heart, and I loved it.
Okay, my next one is the first by an American author, and it is All the Colors of the Dark by Chris Whitaker. Read this over the summer. It's a chunky book. I feel like it was 400 plus pages.
Okay, I have to interrupt.
Yeah.
I do not remember you ever talking about this book. Do I
Did
know
I
this?
don't know.
Oh my
I
gosh.
don't know if I brought it to the podcast or
Okay.
not.
Who's the
And
author?
actually, yeah, I'm checking on Storygraph. It was almost 600 pages. Like it's a chunker of a book. And I flew through it because it has short chapters. Plus, the story is so propulsive that you're just like, you have to read it. And so I'm going to quick synopsis. It takes place 1975, somewhere in the US. I can't remember which state. And there is a serial killer on the loose and one who is abducting young girls in this one particular little town. And this young boy, Patch, who only has one eye, comes across the serial killer is trying to kidnap the one of the prominent father's daughters in the woods one day. Patch comes across it, is able to stop the abduction. The girl gets away. Patch gets taken instead. And due to that happening, Patch ends up going on a journey for the majority of his life looking for something. And so it's the story of Patch. It's the story of his best friend. And I'm going to see if I can't find her name because she was amazing. Nope, I don't see it here, but he has a best friend who doesn't, while as a child, when he has, I'm not really spoiling, this happens in the first part of the book,
Mhm.
when Patch is missing because he's not a member of a prominent family. His best friend is the one that really keeps people looking for him. It's a book about their friendship as they become adults, as Patch continues to search for something, as his best friend becomes a police officer and continues to do something as well. It's about love. It's about a serial killer. Oh my God, it's so good. But the serial killer really is like just a vehicle to get the story of these characters' lives and their loves. And oh my God, it's so good, Rebecca. You will love this book.
I do remember you talking about it, but I didn't remember the title
Yeah.
nor that it was 600 pages. Like, I
Yes.
just somehow missed that part. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it went so
Wow.
quickly that I would have said, I knew it was a big book, but I would have said 400 pages. When I just
Mhm.
saw on 600, I'm like, I did not remember that because you just fly through it.
Wow.
Yeah.
My next book is Eleanor Curtain by Lucy E.M. Black, and she wrote The Brickworks, which you and I both loved. But I have to say, when I read this book, as you know, I'm not a romance reader, but this is the exact kind of romance that if I'm going to read a romance, this is what I want to read. And again, her historical research is absolutely impeccable. So it's about Eleanor, who comes to Canada from Ireland because her cousin had married a man and had come to Canada, and she really is worried about her and she wants to check on her, kind of like Mexican Gothic, only to me a lot better. And there's no Gothic horror going on. But anyway, it's the same concept, right? She's coming to see how her cousin is. And then she makes her life. And it's about this community. I mean, yes, it's the romance, which I loved. But even if you hadn't had that romance, I would have still absolutely loved this book because, again, the research makes you feel like you are literally in the middle of the, not literally, figuratively in the middle of this time period because it's just so amazingly accurate, but it's seamlessly woven in so that it doesn't feel like, oh, so she's telling us this is how they did this or how they did that. It's just a natural part of the story. It's almost like it's been written at that time period and not someone who's looking back from 2020 and writing it, right? And so I loved it, loved it, loved it. And I am so very thankful that I found Lucy and that I will continue to read everything she writes.
Yeah. I have to read that book. I have to read that one.
Especially because you really like the Brickworks.
I did.
And I love the Brickworks, but I have to admit, I love this one even a tad more.
Yeah. Like the Brickwork almost made my top 5 here. It was so
Mhm.
close. It was so close.
Yeah, I loved
It
that one
should have put
too.
it. But you know what? It kind of did make our top 10 here because we're talking about
We're
it. So
talking about it, absolutely.
there we go. Okay, so my next one, another American author, is Same as It Ever Was by Claire Lombardo. And this is the story of a marriage. Essentially, it is the story of a marriage. One woman, we start at the beginning. Julia is in her 50s, married, and she, in the grocery store, meets a woman who she hasn't seen in probably about 20 years. I can't remember the woman's name, but she's an older woman who she had a deep friendship with in her 30s when she was a young mother. Something happened that kind of derailed Julia and her marriage for a while. The friendship ends. Then she meets this woman again, and it all comes back. So you get the story of what happened in Julia's life as a young mother, as a young wife, and then you get her story now, like in her 50s with 2 adult children, with a marriage. And I loved this story, and I think I wrote in my book, I don't have it here in my book journal, like it was a 4-star read because I really enjoyed it. And it's a long book as well. But it was a 4-star read until like the last 20 pages and then became like a 5-star read. Like instantly, I was
Awesome.
like, the end of it, I'm like, bam, I loved it. And now I want to go back and read. I think Claire Lombardo has at least one book previous to this because this is her most recent book. And I'll read whatever else she puts out there.
I love that.
Yeah.
And wait a minute, she's an American author or a Canadian author?
Yes, American.
American. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
All right,
And
cool.
Julia at time, the main character is not a likable character, especially when she's young. But yeah, I don't know how many of us really are when we're young. We're all kind of a-holes, right? Like at some point or another. And so,
I raised my
so I
hand.
was like, I
Yes.
was okay. I was okay with it. I don't mind unlikable characters. And then, by the end of it, I love Julia. It's a great book. Okay, Rebecca, I
Here
think
we
you're going to
go.
bring us home. Bring
I
us
think you
home.
and I think you and I should say this at the same time. I'm assuming this book is on your list as well, but my
Yeah.
number one fiction read of the year is
James
James
by
by
Percival
Percival
Everett.
Everett. Absolutely. I'm telling you, there's nothing that we can say about this book other than it just won, was it the National Book Award, or it's won so many things.
Yeah.
He's won so many things. If you haven't read it, do yourself a favor, read it. You will, I guarantee you will absolutely love this book.
Yeah.
That's all I'm
Yeah.
going to say.
I know. It's a retelling of Huckleberry Finn in which James is the hero. Like,
Mhm.
it's just fantastic. It's heartwarming. It's tragic. It's funny. It's
Mhm.
Percival Everett.
Yeah.
There's vengeance. Come
Yeah.
on. Come on.
It
That's
has
all.
everything you want in a great American novel.
Yes.
A true American novel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Loved it. Okay.
That's it, folks.
I actually have one more. So this is my
You have
last
one
one.
more.
I have one more.
Awesome. Okay.
That's okay. Okay. My last one is my nonfiction. I said it earlier in the year that this was going to be my best. So this is not only my favorite nonfiction, and I read, and let me just say this, and I'm sure you will say the same thing. We read so many amazing books because I don't think either one of us, we kind of DNF. If we're not enjoying something, we just DNF, right? So we read a boatload of amazing books this year. And this is simply, you know, today, this is my top 10. I could be thinking about something else and change it or whatever. But right now, this is my top 10. But I read a lot of great nonfiction. But Outsider, An Old Man, a Mountain, and the Search for a Hidden Past by Brett Popplewell was my number one nonfiction book, my number one read of this year. I loved every single thing about this book. I've done so many deep dives into it, and not only, well, I don't want to say anything because if you read it, I don't want to say anything. All right. Anyway, it's a fabulous book. Read it. Great nonfiction about an old man who lives in an old bus in the middle of somewhere in BC, like in a wooded area. And he had a great life when he was younger, but there's this incredible story about him and his past that Brett helps uncover. And it is nonfiction at its absolute best. And I will 100% go back and read Brett's other stuff. He's written a lot for journals as well, magazines. I'm going to read that. I want to read his other books, and I will continue to read him because he just writes the kind of nonfiction that makes me really happy.
That's amazing.
Ta-da!
I'm sorry, I lost track of count, so I feel like we got like a bonus book there, which is awesome. And I love that you found a new favorite author in 2024.
Yeah. So thank you, Eden Mills, because if it hadn't been for Eden Mills, I would not have known about Brett's book. I don't know that it ever would have popped up on my feed or whatever. I just don't think it would have. And so that is the thing. That's why people should go to literary festivals. You will uncover great authors, new to you, perhaps. Support them, love their work, read them, etc.
Yeah. Okay. So that is it, folks. That is our
Woo-hoo!
top reads of the year. We would love to hear what yours are, so you can send us a message through Instagram. If you're listening on YouTube, leave it in the comments. However you want to contact us, let us know your favorite reads of the year. If you've read something that we haven't, that you think we should, that's on your list, let us know. Because, okay, maybe Rebecca doesn't, but I love building my TBR, even virtually. So send it to us. Send it to us. And that's it. Best wishes and onward to 2025. Thank you for joining us on our bookish journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing Canada Reads American Style wherever you listen. You can connect with the podcast and Rebecca on Instagram at Canada Reads American Style. and with Tara at On a Branch Reads. Until next time, keep reading.